Hey everybody, it's Brad Gibbons, and I'm here with another video. This is called Why the World Needs the Pattern. And I realize that that's a very important question that I really should answer before I proceed with any of the actual metaphysical content. I can't expect you all to be interested unless you understand what I'm working toward and why it's valuable. And I want to make sure also that it's clear that this is not a solo mission on my part. This is something that I want to attract as many collaborators as possible with. Um, I want to tell you some of what I expect to be the consequences of my work. Um, I realize that most or all of the individual works or pieces that I've put out related to my work over the years so far have kind of been, um, I think of it like a fountain, like, a jet of water that comes up from the bottom, but then it kind of disperses and spreads and as it falls, and each droplet kind of goes its own way. And I I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think that I want to point out to you all what is dead ahead. What is that straight up thing that I'm aiming for? That this kind of constellation or these droplets are forming around. Um, and I want to say before I start, I am going to be making some claims that may be called far-fetched, and I want to say that I assert that they're all feasible and I make them in good faith, but I'm not going to be arguing for them or trying to prove them. It's the sort of thing that, like most of all of this stuff, I'm needing to build up to it over time. So just wait and see. So moving forward with the content. Um, So the world needs the pattern as one major tool of restructuring itself to save it from the highly destructive way in which it operates at present. Um, so our current spiritual systems and practices are many and varied. They talk about the same underlying things or aspects and subsets of the same things, but they lack a common language and including literally common language across the world. They lack any sort of objective, overarching system to hold them and allow them to coexist in a way that they can actually interface and build upon each other most easily. In some sense, they lack a standard. And the pattern is a system of theoretical metaphysics. Um, I As far as I know, I'm the only one who's used that term, theoretical metaphysics, but I think it kind of speaks for itself. Metaphysics that's more like physics than it is like religion or prayer or something. Metaphysics that's descriptive and investigatory um, rather than metaphysics that's applied toward a particular goal. Um, so I'm offering everything that I've been working on off the basis of the pattern as basically a new standard. And so I'm talking about, you know, in culture, rationalism and particularly Western culture have become a standard for sort of global society. Um, Science has proceduralized the intentional discovery of new things and social change that goes with it. Um, Taking something that was very intuitive and multifarious and sort of disorganized, and making it something that seeks to be objective and it's likewise spread across the globe. Um, we have basic mathematics using Arabic numerals that's used all over the world, even in places that don't use much Western, alphabet or customs or anything. We're all pretty much in the same number system and the same basic mathematical conventions as far as notation and basic content, and that has spread arguably the furthest of all of what I'm speaking of now. And I can go on and on. Musical notation, internet protocols, and I know that some of these things are controversial, and there's a lot of fervor against imperialism and beliefs that the dominance of these ideas is inextricably tied to the downfall or the loss of other ideas and other cultures. So I say that to acknowledge it and say I'm not pointing to it like that. I'm not talking about that aspect of what these kinds of standards do. I'm actually talking about systems or standards that allow for easier expression of all current existing systems by allowing them to communicate better, for ideas to be shared better. I'm not talking about something that overwrites or replaces existing systems. I think musical notation is a really good one because it in itself it has no content. It's just a device of kind of a content of organizing and describing music that doesn't in any way limit the type of music that can be performed. And I shouldn't say in any way. I know you have like semitones and stuff that you can't really write in notation, but for the most part, it's kind of a just a blank open space that allows for the spread of music in a way that was never possible before, and really, doesn't displace or encroach anything, but just allows things to be shared. That's really what I'm talking about. That's really what I'm going for. So I think that I'm going to be presenting in teaching the world about the pattern, a system of metaphysics that I intend will do the same thing. And I think it's important to point out that all of these types of standards standards make it easier to create intentional change. So they kind of produce a sort of awareness, self-awareness within systems or cultures or different contexts of people that empowers them to be intentional about how they're changing rather than just evolving naturally. So now I'm going to talk about the status quo and why I feel like a standard is a valuable thing to be presenting. I argue that real spiritual attainment has always been reserved for the few, not any particular group, just few in number are able to reach it. And I don't say this as a social criticism at all. I think this is kind of inherent in humanity or inherent in culture. It's been developing since the Neolithic Revolution, quite possibly since the evolution of language. But I think it's a fact, and it's something that can be viewed as undesirable. So I think of it as like a pyramid diagram. It's very tiered. Tiered and progressively, incrementally kind of higher forms. So I personally choose the term enlightenment very frequently to discuss the kind of highest possible goal of or highest possible achievement in spirituality that we can um, attain here on earth at present. Um, and I think that's, I don't, I use it unapologetically, but I do think that it's a bit challenging because much of my audience is going to come from a background of Western Christianity of some kind, which doesn't really have a concept of enlightenment. Um, but I would say, just for the point I'm trying to make now about, you know, spiritual achievement being something of the few, think of the saints. Think of the number of saints there are, and that number compared to the entire population of Christendom over the entire lifespan of Christianity. Very, 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 very small numbers reaching those highest levels, however you want to think of that. The holiest, the closest to God, the most attuned in touch, and so it's usually over history required single-minded devotion, or failing that, a miraculous providential change all at once a gift of God. Um, and even among clergy and other groups with exceptional dedication to their religions or spiritualities, I would argue that only a minority is really doing that um, from the highest level of spiritual actualization that they're capable of in that place. I think that um, even all groups are kind of have a variety of spiritual levels, and of course it's kind of inherently improper to signal out who's who, or like to quantify or to say, these priests are the really cream of the crop priests, and these priests are kind of just getting by. So I know that I'm, like I said at the beginning, I'm kind of flirting with some socially difficult ideas, and this is not something that I really do often or willingly. This is something that I'm doing because I feel that my work needs something to kind of start its outward facingness, to shift from being centered around me and this is what I'm doing because it's my calling, versus um, this is what I'm doing because it's the best thing for you all. It's the best that I can give to the world. It's the best that I can give to the public and to the audience of whatever work I'm creating like this. Um, so I'm going out on a limb a lot here and saying things that many people will have issue with. Um, and I just want you to know that I know that that's not really my place, and that usually I don't really talk about social stuff. It's not my forte at all. But anyway, these are my views. So anyway, uh, so in total, all in all, spiritual evolution or attainment is really hard. And we as a society, as a culture, as a species, as our whole world, we really don't know how to do it right. If we knew how to do it right, we would all be doing it. We would all be succeeding in it. We would all be rising up through it, with it. And when I say we don't know how to do it right, I'm not saying, well, for one thing, I'm not saying that I know how to do it right. But I'm saying I know things that can help us collectively figure out how to do it right. But I'm not trying to fault anyone for underachieving, so to speak. I think of this as a structural problem. I'm trying to lay it out, just like our economic and political problems. It's problems that affect everybody, and that some people seem to participate more than others, but it's really a problem with the entire structure of society, or whatever structure is at play. Um, and I also don't think that I'm discounting religion. Uh, Gosh, I'm a little anxious here. And I'm not saying that there's any, nor am I saying that there's a problem in the multitude of the variety of religions and spiritual systems that exist now. I actually think religion is, on net, a great boon to human life. Um, I think people's lives are greatly enriched at every level and sub-level of that pyramid diagram you can imagine. Um, and I think that through religion and spiritual practice, God does enter people's lives at greater levels than would otherwise be the case, even though the result still does leave a great deal of room for improvement. So I'm talking about creating a sort of metaphysical lingua franca, um, a theory that can be the basis of all sorts of metaphysical engineering projects and also personal practical applications. So while I'm teaching theoretical metaphysics, I'm doing so with the explicit desire and expectation that it will be used in practical applications. Um, and let me real quick. I was going to do this later in my notes, but just define metaphysics. um, as I talked about theoretical metaphysics in a sort of vague term, but um, metaphysics to me is how reality works, or the study of how reality works. Reality being an all-inclusive term here, what exists at the highest level, from the mental to the quantum to the everyday to the societal, just everything. And few people think of metaphysics in that way. I don't think that saying how reality works is something that people would criticize. I do think that it's not the most common way to describe metaphysics, but metaphysics in common usage kind of comes from two different camps. Um, Philosophy, in which case it is the subfield of philosophy which tries to answer like basic questions like where do we come from, and where do we go after we die, and um, why is there suffering, how are the mind and the body connected, do we have souls, are we single unified objects, or do we consist of multiple levels like dualism, or body and soul, or mind, body, soul, or stuff like that. So I think it's kind of in philosophy most commonly defined not really as a single group of. It's kind of a loosely defined collection of questions of standard, deep, thought-provoking, unanswerable questions. Um, on the other hand, metaphysics is very frequently used in kind of more progressive spiritualities or spiritual communities that I know of, um, to refer to what I would call applied metaphysics, or what's what's the other word? It doesn't matter. So I'm talking about healing, techniques of prayer, techniques of meditation, things like acupuncture and like flow of chi, and crystals, and like kind of down and dirty practical, um, either tools or technologies or wisdom that can be used to uh, aid in spiritual growth and attainment. Um, so yeah, there you go. That was kind of a longish aside. But so going back to talking about a metaphysical lingua franca. So in the past, I would say that applied metaphysics is pretty much just sacred or occult, intuitive, and ritual practices. Um, but with knowledge of the pattern, you can also employ programming, algorithms, and engineering in applied metaphysics. So I'm talking about something that would expand from just a toolkit kind of approach to just something more basic, low level, um, that can really be manipulated and worked with at scale beyond just personal, even. Um, so I want to make sure another kind of disclaimer that that you know that my work does fall outside of religion. I pretty much will talk about religion to draw examples or concepts relevant to whatever I'm trying to teach, but I, I, um, and you know, in no way when I speak about religion do I mean to alienate anyone or exclude anyone. Um, and so these statements are opinions, which frankly are outside of my work. This is kind of an end cap to get my work started in a more public way. Um, but these are just my views. They're not inspired, not divine necessarily, just my understanding. Um, okay, so moving on, I'm going to talk about the use of the mind and why the pattern is a really big plus with regards to that. So, in the present day, most concepts in spirituality must be learned through long practice uh, without using the mind to the advantage of the learning process, like we learn other things by studying, by learning intentionally, um, engaging the mind. You know, so we have many concepts in spirituality and religion, and often they're regarded as very esoteric, very out there, ethereal, otherworldly, and so forth, as basically inherently not things that um, can be processed or grasped directly with the mind. Nevertheless, our culture, our society, the whole world has never been so mind centered, so focused on our minds. Um, we have such high levels of literacy around the world. We're very focused on information, on data, living in and through our minds, usually considering ourselves to actually be our own inner dialogue, thinking of the continuous stream of our minds as constituting or being kind of inseparably entwined with ourselves, with what we are. Um, our minds are the framework of our lives, for the most part. Um, we have near universal public education. We have many societal and kind of national and global institutions and assumptions that favor the mind and our reliance on it. And so current spiritual processes are just not designed for people like us. Um, you could say that many of the older practices had very different cultures, very different educational levels, greater sort of naivete, greater a different predominant psychology, a different mythos, different life experiences, different paces of life back then, um, much greater connectedness to nature. And these things, uh, kind of a hodgepodge list of things, but um, those things are things that basically indicate that, for the most part, we use spiritual systems that are very old, and they may be reformed and updated, over time, but that have very, very old roots, and they are rooted in times and cultures and societies that were not anywhere near as mind focused and mind centered as we are today. Um, so they're not really well suited for maximizing spiritual evolution within society now. Um, However, enlightenment is for everybody. There is no all of this stuff I'm saying about the status quo and how it's been and what we can do and what we've been able to do. It's not because it has to be that way. And ultimately, I absolutely know and believe that God wants us all to attain that highest level, enlightenment, or whatever you choose to call it. So, by giving the pattern to the world, by sharing the pattern and what I've learned from studying it with the world, I envision having metaphysics taught like physics or math, having it be something that is kind of very systematically and taught on a widespread level to give everybody a basic, some certain basic level of grounding in metaphysics. Um, it's very important because metaphysics, being how reality works, is sort of a level of analysis that, I consider it to be the highest level of analysis, and therefore the most powerful because it's not domain specific at all. It encompasses every possible state of mind and person and situation because it's literally what is making everything happen. What's going on, and so I think it will eventually be taught in schools, and it should be taught in schools. Um, so I'm thinking about teaching people spirituality via metaphysics to our mind-centered culture within our mind-centered psychology. So, not needing to act, not needing to step outside of the one's current or everyday state of mind, not needing to learn a whole new state of consciousness before learning, why do things happen as they do? What is going on here? What's under the hood in reality? Um, so people can gain a practical understanding of things like luck and sin and confusing feelings about others and addiction and disorders and illnesses and of course more esoteric things like you know like life and death and where the cosmos is headed. But I'm really trying to focus on saying that this is a field of study and a system within that field of study that uh, will be revolutionary and will be applicable to everyone, useful for everyone in some extent or another. Not that I expect everyone to use it equally or study it equally or understand it equally. Um, just like, all the things that are taught in schools nowadays. I mean, it doesn't mean that people learn them, but I'm just trying to say that the scope and breadth and power of metaphysics based on the pattern of all that is super, super applicable. And just because I'm talking about it as theoretical, I'm just saying that to refer to the fact that it's um, kind of that it's ascertained with the mind, that it is more like physics than like prayer, that it um, that what I'm trying to say is that I'm not trying to. I don't mean to say theoretical in the sense of it may or may not be true, or it's only um, a possible interpretation, or it's a certain sort of hypothesis or argument. I mean um, theoretical in that it is theory rather than practice. Um, and real quick, I'm not degrading metaphysics as it is. I think there's many good and useful ideas in metaphysics and concepts and practices. But I really think metaphysics is in its infancy, and I'm trying to get it to grow up and be a mainstream discipline of itself, of its own. So here's what I expect. This will change the world. There's no question about that. And I must do all I can in my lifetime. That's my mission. But I acknowledge on one level that this will probably take centuries. I'm not trying to actually enact, programs of teaching metaphysics in schools or anything. I what I'm sharing now is visions and visions that, for the large or by and large, are just consequences and side effects of what I'm trying to do, and not things that I'm trying to bring about directly. These are kind of more like predictions. But so I expect it'll probably take centuries um, for what I start to share with the world to become mainstream, become widespread. To take on a role of standard, like I was talking about at the beginning of this. Um, so it's a revolutionary paradigm, and what I'm trying to do is create a trickle down effect, basically. Um, I'm trying to I'm trying to get a sorry, I'll just stick with the notes. um, so trickle down, for one thing, among people in disciplines like what I studied in college and high school: math, science, physics, linguistics, psychology, metaphysics, philosophy. Among spiritual-minded people of all stripes in every camp and any religion who are interested in using their intellect to better understand the what they already know, or in spirituality and in their religions, of trying to add the additional layer on top of working with the heart, or working with community engagement, or um, all of the ordinary things that are essential to human life and that we have religion for, to enforce in the first place, or teach in the first place, or help with. Um, you know, I want to find among all those people those who think that it makes sense to try to understand it with the mind too. Not to leave the mind out of the equation. And so I'm trying to develop a large and diverse following. Um, I say When I say trickle down, I don't really mean that I'm going to be focusing on people at the top of systems or structures. Um, but I mention them specifically because they are where the structural change can start. Remember before I said that the fact that spiritual attainment has always been for the few is a structural problem. It's not uh, something inherent to spirituality. Um, so I want to sort of, as part of my diverse following of personally teaching and spreading my message to every corner and in many different ways, as God leads me to. I want to seed people who will be willing and able to change the systems that they work with to create a ripple, kind of, that's spreads throughout society and around the world, and ultimately uh, encounters and uplifts all people. Um, and I envision uh, personally teaching it in a variety of contexts, but also um, all of it's going to be totally free. I want it to be taught for many different purposes, with many different kind of slants and backgrounds. It's I am trying to find or develop the center, the core of this system, the standard, this language. Um, but I don't want to control it or anything. I really want to foster and foment and encourage this this core to give rise to this outward ripple that touches people in the way that's most effective for them to be touched. I'm by no means thinking that my kind of very sort of like logical, mathy kind of intellectual approach is for everybody. I know it's not. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. And so the only specific practical goal that I do have is to, over the course of my lifetime, to eradicate mental illness, including addiction. And that, I think, would make among the biggest difference, and I have the personal experience to connect with it and quickly come up with the metaphysical models um, that are most salient and useful in attacking it. And I also think it's a level of problem that we can make a dent in pretty quickly. And I'm not, I don't really care if it's in my lifetime, but I'm just trying to say that I do have that one concrete goal apart from the my mission, apart from the grand goal. Um, and it's still just a part of my work, though. I mean, it's not a priority. And I hope that there will be others that can work with me, others around me that can take it on as their priority. Um, but I mean, my priority is and always will be to share the pattern of the world, as broadly, as fully, as freely, as continuously as possible. Um, and I think that mental illness and addiction being taken care of, it is really going to be a side effect of that anyway. But I think it's something that is worth attacking directly as well. So, so notice that I'm not talking about starting a new faith. I'm not talking about starting a new religion. And also, I'm going to make an extravagant claim that what I will share with the world will not require faith. It's not going to be something that has to be accepted on faith. It can be accepted on Occam's razor. It can be accepted on its sheer elegance and its simplicity and its beauty and its explanatory power. It's a descriptive system, and it's not about believing something or not. And so, in closing, the first shall be first, and the last shall be first. We're all in this together. Thanks, guys.